Okay, hey, I'm gonna start. Mostly because I gotta go at like 3:25 or something, so I'm gonna talk super fast. Because I have to drive a carpool and I didn't plan to drive a carpool. But on the test here, I told you almost everything on the FRQ, and still, even in the period, I told you about this type of thing, but I didn't show you this notation. Do not stress out because the notation, there's like a key on the FRQ anyway, so it'll tell it to you, but sometimes people freak out a little bit if it's like, hey, that looks different than what I've seen before, you know what I mean? So you're gonna have something sort of like this, not exactly this, but it'll give you a gland. I think it names it, it might be the pituitary, I don't totally remember. It kind of doesn't matter what gland it is, okay? But it's gonna be like gland 1 releases hormone 1, okay? It might name it, it might not, doesn't matter. This arrow, certain arrows are gonna be like more important than others. So it's gonna say that arrow means, and there'll be a key that says it. So there'll be like a notation, okay? And it'll say, hormone 1 stimulates gland 2, okay? Gland 2 makes hormone 2. And then there's gonna be this funky symbol, so there'll be like this kind of comes back here, and it goes there. And so what that symbol means, if it's not an arrow, again, there's a key, so I'm only showing it to you so it's not like weird when you see it. Instead of an arrow, which would mean like turns it on, this flat thingy means inhibits, okay? So it stops gland number 1, all right? That part makes sense, okay. This is called negative feedback. So if hormone 2, oh, goggles already. Okay, if hormone 2 levels are high, then it comes back here and it turns off gland 1. Now, the reason that it kind of should make sense is because hormone 2 kind of turns off its own production, right? So if my levels of hormone 2 get really, really high, I'm like, I don't need that anymore. So it's gonna go to the beginning of the sequence and be like, yeah, turn it off. We don't need any more of it, all right? The more challenging part is the opposite is also true, okay? What if hormone 2, if H2 hormone 2 levels are low, then there is no hormone 2, or there's very little hormone 2, right? So it can't come back and inhibit anymore. Now what happens to gland 1? It's on, yeah, or it's more, yeah. Okay, so this is kind of what I was getting at when I was like, it messes everybody up, but sometimes if your hormone level drops too low, something brings it back up to normal. That's still negative feedback, even though we've increased something. So the other way to draw it is if this is the set point, or like, set point is like your target, right? Like that's what you're supposed to be at. If we increase beyond our set point, and we're like, oh shoot, my blood glucose levels are too high, then some hormone brings it back down to normal, right? That's called negative feedback. But again, similarly, if our hormone level or blood glucose level goes too low, there's a different hormone that brings it back to normal. That's also called negative feedback. Okay? So the only time, and so there's a question, I think I told you in class, but I forget what I said. There's gonna be a question where something's gonna drop too low, it's gonna go back to high, and everybody always chooses, oh good, that was positive feedback because you made more. It wasn't positive feedback. We had dropped low and we returned to normal. That's called negative feedback because it was dropping, and then we switched the direction. That's why. So negative means like the course you're going, or is that a vector or something? I don't know. That's physics. I hate it. Yep.
So negative feedback will always go back to normal no matter what direction you're going?
Yes. Perfect. Exactly. If I do positive, I'll draw positive though. Here's my set point. This is positive. All right, I keep going away from what I'm supposed to normally be. And so something is ramping up. Usually it's increasing. I haven't really seen positive feedback decreasing, but it could. I mean, in theory, but it really doesn't. In one of the classes, I think I mentioned something about like a speaker, like if you have the stereo on or whatever, or if I had my speakers on and so it was really low and somebody's like, I like that song. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll turn it up. And then more people go, oh, I like that song. So I turn it up even more. More people can hear it. And then they go, oh, I like that song. And we keep turning it up and up and up and up. I'm never returning to normal, right? I keep like increasing the volume. That's the same thing. Good on that? Works? Okay, cool. Hi, do you have presents for me? You do have presents.
Pencil sharpener, electric one.
Oh my god. I feel like I'm in the 2000s now.
Yes.
Or even the 1990s. Like, I've been living in the 50s. Thank you. That's cool. Okay. Good on that? Okay. So, this is one part of the FRQ. Okay, the front of it. This is the other part of it. The immune graph I already showed you, so you already have that. Remember what's the thing? Yeah, that I showed you at the end. All right. Next one is the other thing that's kind of tough. Here's what we did. Okay. Now, we're going to have cells in different locations, okay? So, and I kind of went over it in class, but here's your heart. That's your liver, obviously. Let's do another one. I don't know. We'll do something. Here's your pituitary on the bottom. Okay. These are cells. I'm going to draw little cells. There's a cell in your heart. Cell right there. So just remember, when we have hormones released, they often want to make a change, like possibly create a protein or something like that's most often what they want to do. Proteins or enzymes. So, or they want to turn on an enzyme that's already there. But oftentimes they want to talk to your DNA usually. Okay. So if we have we have maybe a stimulus. Okay. And so we have hormone 1. We're just going to use that again. If H1 is nonpolar, let's say it gets released through the bloodstream, so H1 is traveling through the bloodstream, it's going to go into this cell. It's in fact going to travel all the way into the cell, all the way into the cytoplasm, into the nucleus. And then H1 can act probably, oftentimes, as a transcription factor. Like to turn on a gene, okay? So, because it is lipid soluble, okay? Or non-polar. I said it was some sort of, I don't know, it's like some sort of a receptor. I don't know what it is yet. It's a cell. We're going to decide what it does in a minute. I'm just curious what hormone I'm talking about. I'm just kind of rambling as I do. Because I made it all up. It's all fake anyway. So let's make it, we can make it capillary. Yeah, it's just a part of your body. Or we can make it your sinuses or something. Anyway, so that's going to make some sort of an enzyme. All right? Maybe it makes a happy enzyme. Makes a happy enzyme. Let's say H2 is also released at the same time. H2 though is polar. All right? So maybe that's what it is. Let's just make it. We'll make it all about like happiness and stuff like that. So maybe something has stimulated me to be happy, like tomorrow is Friday. How about tomorrow is Friday? And then that's caused like some sort of a weird hormonal release. It goes to part of my brain. Okay, so that's what it is, Vincent. It's part of my brain. It's part of my brain that's like, oh my God, now I feel happy because I just realized it's Friday. That's cool, right? But hormone 1 and hormone 2, they both got released. Hormone 2 is going to travel to my heart, but it is polar, so it has to have a receptor, right? It lands on my heart receptor, and it causes my heart to be warmed. I'm just making it up. I don't know. Like it beats faster because I'm so excited. Yes. Okay. So heart beats faster because I'm so thrilled it's Friday. But it also, hormone 2, also goes to, let's make it my stomach instead, right here. There's also a receptor on my stomach, all right? And it makes me hungry because sometimes my husband stops for burritos on the way home on Friday, and that's my favorite meal. So sometimes he brings me Freebirds, which is like, almost, that's why I stay married to him, because Freebirds is delicious. Do you go to Freebirds? Good job. If you don't, go. You have to. Most people don't have taste buds. That's a really sad way to live. Okay, so anyway. So look, hormone 2, same hormone, made my heart beat faster and made me hungry. But it also went here. Hormone 2 also circulated up here to my hair follicle. My hair follicle cell, though, has no receptor. Look, it's just a hair follicle cell. So it didn't make my hair grow. Just because it's Friday, your hair's not going to grow any extra. Okay? So there's your lesson. It's not going to bind here because there's no receptor, right? No receptor. So the important part is, one hormone, multiple effects. Another hormone had a different effect because it was nonpolar. It could slip through all the way into the DNA, into the nucleus, where the DNA is, turn on a gene, and it made the happy enzyme. The other ones just made my heart beat faster and suddenly made me hungry. Good? One response. Well, 2 hormonal responses. 1 stimulus, because it's Friday. Got it? Okay. Here's the next thing that I mentioned actually, and I forgot to mention. Maybe I'll leave it on board. Let's leave it on board. And then I'll have to erase it, but then okay. Sometimes your set point, like our normal state of being, is not exactly right. So there are some points in your life where you're going to need more or less of a certain hormone. So even though maybe your normal amount of hormone is like 50 milligrams or something, sometimes when you're going through puberty, you may need to have, like your normal needs to be a little higher because you're growing so fast. You have all these changes happening, you know what I mean? So that's why you get a little crazy. So your normal hormone levels, although you're probably, most of you are done with like the biggest part of puberty, but your normal hormone levels when you were in middle school was probably different. So you have a new normal as you get older, and like I have a way different normal than you would have, right? So what we have to do when you have a set point adjustment, meaning we have a change in our lives that changes what we need for our body, that's called feed forward information. So like your body says to you, we're in a period of rapid growth, like you're 12 years old and you're starting to grow or whatever. So then you're gonna have a different like target, okay? So just so you know. Next thing is, I kind of talked about it, but to make sure that you get it, because there are a couple questions about it. If, let's say, we have a few different cells in the bloodstream, or in your tissues, we're going to get hormones delivered to those cells. So here's hormone 1 at normal levels. So my cell under normal conditions should have hormones visiting it. Like your cells know what to expect. That's kind of their set point, right? So this is under normal conditions. I have a couple receptors. I have enough hormone. I'm doing fine. So a hormone will land on the receptor. The cell will do its job. Everyone is happy. I think I mentioned it, but the questions are kind of confusing. Oh, sorry, not true. But I did too. If something is malfunctioning, or if I mess with myself, like by taking some sort of a medicine or a drug or something, I've now taken too much of a hormone, or any other signaling molecule, but we're talking about hormones, so that's what I keep using. Remember that the hormone is like a ligand. It's attracted to the receptor, okay? So this is a chemical attraction, mostly like hydrogen bonds and stuff, but still there's a significant attraction there. So if the hormone's here, it's gonna want to bond or bind. If I have tons and tons of hormone, then odds are I will have more binding. So more hormone, more binding, right? However, that's gonna overstimulate the cell. If my normal level was like, I got one hormone to bond, I did the job that I needed to do, I was happy. But if I have way too many hormones, then my cell's gonna be like, this is too much, I'm overactive, and it's gonna start to waste energy. Because remember, most of the time, a hormone tells your cell to do something, it's gonna use some energy. So what the cell does is it takes away a receptor so that it can go back to what the normal status was. Remember, my normal that I drew was one hormone landed on a receptor. I had an empty receptor, but the cell was already happy. Now I had like extra hormones landing on extra receptors. So I downregulate the receptors so that then I'm getting normal stimulation. Opposite is true. If, remember, I always started out with 2 receptors. If there's maybe not enough hormone and it's like just not even coming close to my cell, remember we're talking about the bloodstream, so I want you to picture things are like dissolved in the bloodstream. This hormone might just float right by the cell if it's a dilute enough solution of hormone. It might not even see the cell, it might not bind to it. So the cell is going to be desperate for hormone, okay? So, oops. If it needs stimulation, it wants to up its chances or increase its odds of catching a hormone. So like picture it like catching a fish. So it's like the more fishing lines, the more fishing lines I put out to like receptors. If I put way more receptors out there, then maybe, look, that hormone that was gonna float by, maybe it gets caught here, and then I'm back to normal stimulation, okay? So again, I had low levels of hormone. So low hormone leads to upregulation. Okay? Now, the whole point in your book, or one of the questions in your book was like, if your body becomes accustomed to this and you've like upregulated your receptors and you suddenly start taking a medicine or whatever it is, you're gonna have a huge shock to your system, right? Like they're all gonna bind on here and that cell's gonna get overwhelmed. So for a lot of medications, I mean, not every medication, but for a lot of things, if you're gonna go on a long-term medication, they try to wean you on and wean you off, meaning like you start out like a little bit, and then week by week, maybe you take a little bit more and more to get your cells used to it so they don't freak out, right? This was when we were talking about with like the drugs and stuff like that. Okay, good there. So there's a couple questions about up and down regulation, all right? Type 2 diabetes, by the way, I should write that down too to remind myself. So remember, diabetes is an insulin problem. It's due to down regulation. So down regulation, look, is right here, okay? So here's what's happened, and I'll tell it to you briefly, and then we'll do the immune system real fast. And then honestly, that's everything we did. We're over halfway done what I did in Saxon time, because I'm talking fast. But you have questions if you have questions. Type 2 diabetes is the one that's usually not inherited. So usually the risk factors are obesity, poor diet, like overly sugary foods. It's not always obesity. If you only eat like Fruit Loops and ice cream for your whole life, your cells are like, wow, that's just a lot of sugar. So they're always getting hit with sugar. So if hormone 1, if instead it's sugar, this cell is like, oh my God, I'm bathing in sugar. So it brings down its receptors for that. So then when we do have sugar, it overstimulates, all right? So anyway, downregulation of insulin receptors makes it so that they don't know what to do with the insulin, and then they can't reduce their blood sugar. Good, you don't have to know much more about it. I'm just telling you that as a little tidbit. The last part that I was gonna tell you, I was gonna list, this is kind of like almost giving you a multiple choice, but whatever, you're here. So, some of the things that are listed as non-specific, I wanted to make sure. This is immune, okay? So you already know skin and mucus and stuff, probably, okay? But under the category was also, what? Inflammation. So we sort of talked about it because it was on the Kahoot, I think. But inflammation is one of the non-specific things that happens, right? So under that category, like during inflammation, a bunch of different things are going on. So first, your blood vessels dilate. And that means they expand. You know, the one that, I mean, it was supposed to trick you, but the one on the Kahoot was like blood vessels constrict instead. So that means get smaller. So it'll say dilate, which is get bigger. Also, cell division increases. And some of these things should be logical. Like if you think of an injury or an infection or something, if your cells are dying or if you just like cut yourself, you hurt your cells, we want to make sure we can divide the cells. So part of the inflammation response is it stimulates mitosis to happen. Your body temperature goes up. I think that was on your quiz too. The reason your body temperature goes up, and I'm not talking about a fever right now. So a fever is kind of a different thing, but your body temperature will increase because usually, you know, reactions happen faster at a slightly higher temperature, not like at a fever, because a fever kind of is bad, but it'll increase the rate of your enzymes. And then it increases mucus and lysozyme. And lysozyme is gonna be there to prevent invasion. Like if you cut yourself, we don't want bacteria getting in there because you kind of like opened up your tissues, you know, so you don't want that. So it'll prevent that, okay? The super last thing, I know I already showed it to you, but I'm gonna add one more thing to it. Okay. On that graph that I already showed you, there are also some multiple choice ones that sort of go with it, right? So if this is gonna be T cells, B cells, or antibodies, which are all specific, okay? So that response graph, the one that I gave you on your review paper, is not referring to like inflammation and stuff. We can't really, inflammation doesn't have any memory. You could have inflammation today and then again tomorrow and again the next day. It's not like you can not get a headache again. You know what I mean? So that's kind of a bummer. It might not be for the same reason though. So remember, we always start out with a baseline set of B and T cells. And they're like waiting for their pathogen, okay? So they were born in you because of DNA rearrangements. So each of the B and T cells is different. Each of them is looking for a completely different pathogen. But there's a certain level of them, it's just not really high. They're just circulating and waiting. As soon as you get infected, so this would be the point of infection, your graph, it changed the scale, I think I showed you, but on the bottom on your x-axis, the first part was weeks and then it said years and days and stuff like that. So it was changing the scale, which is kind of a weird thing to do in science. But what would happen is these would start increasing. I know the slope on yours seemed higher, but that was because it was in weeks. It's going to increase your number of T and B cells until you're okay. And then this is where you beat infection. This is where you suppress or kill B and T cytotoxic and T helper cells. And then, let me stop it. And then here's where B memory and T memory cells are. All right, those are what are circulating. So you started with this, now you have a few more of those. And when I say those cells, I mean specific to only this certain infection, like only mono or something. Okay, you had a couple. Now you have more, they're just circulating and waiting. You get infected again, and it's literally almost a vertical line because these memory cells are able to make B cells, B plasma cells, T cytotoxic and T helper cells. They can like differentiate. So even though they used to be a memory cell, they're like, here, I'm gonna divide them a bajillion times. Some of you are gonna be cytotoxic, some of you are gonna be helper. And then same thing happens. But here again, we have B memory and T memory cells. They'll keep circulating the rest of your life. Then somebody asked again earlier, like, what if I get exposed a third time? Okay, same thing. Goes up. It just keeps happening if you keep exposing yourself, which is unfortunate, but you probably wouldn't even notice. So it'll spike again, and then you'll have even more B and T memory cells, so you're fine. Okay? Let's see if I have one more. Oh, I don't remember if I wrote it on the board. So, think I wrote it on the board, but I'm not sure. It'll say clonal selection. All that means is copying cells a lot. They say clones because they really are kind of, well, they're clones. So when we say that, we're referring to cells that are very specific, remember, like only to mono or whatever it is. So they realize once that T helper cell sees an antigen, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to make a lot of copies of myself. So that's called clone. It got selected by the antigen, it's like, or activated by the antigen, you can think of it as, but selection is what they mean. Like, you're the one that has to fight against mono. You're the only one that we have to fight against mono. So that's why it is selected to clone itself, make a bunch of copies. It'll die off later, but that's another clonal selection. Anytime you're making copies of B and T cells. All right. Do you have questions? Okay. That is everything, I believe. Okay? And your review.
How does the B memory and T memory cells rise if you're not
Just because there's separate. You already had some.
they keep
And then they